Okay, so today we're going to dive into a really unsettling part of history, and that's the Pedophile Information Exchange, or what's commonly known as PIE. They were active in the UK back in the 1970s, and this group, shocking as it is to say, openly advocated for the legalization of sex with children. You shared a BBC investigation with me, and it really kind of blew my mind. It uncovered this secret membership list, and there were over 300 names on this list. And what's even more disturbing is that it's possible that some of the people on that list are still working with children today. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to take a look at this really disturbing period. We'll explore the facts, we'll explore the evidence that the BBC presented in this report.
What I find really, I guess, intriguing is the word, is that PIE, this organization, emerged during a time of really significant social and cultural change in the UK in the 1970s. You had all these movements for civil rights and really pushing for greater freedoms. And shockingly, PIE tried to position themselves within this waves of progressivism, presenting their agenda as another form of liberation. The so-called right of adults to engage in sexual activity with children.
It's really hard to even fathom how they could even attempt to do that. Did they have any kind of public presence at all?
They did. And it's unsettling. PIE spokespeople actually gave interviews, appeared in the media, arguing for the lowering of the age of consent. And disturbingly, they even suggested that children as young as 4 could consent to sexual activity. They also published a magazine, it's called Magpie, for their members, for their kind of spreading their agenda.
It just seems unfathomable that this would even be allowed, Even during a time of social change, like you said, what were the factors that allowed them to operate, at least for a time, in the public sphere?
Yeah, that's a great question. While it's important to us now, you have to remember that certain segments of society back in the 70s were more open to discussing, sexuality and challenging traditional norms. And this openness, while it was positive in many ways, it may have inadvertently provided a space for PIE's harmful ideology to gain some traction. Certainly not an excuse for their actions, but understanding this context is really important.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to be critical of any movement or ideology, no matter how progressive it might seem on the surface. So let's dive into the heart of this BBC investigation now, and that's the secret membership list. So how did they even obtain this list?
It's kind of an interesting chain of custody. The BBC received the list from a former social worker. His name was Peter McKelvey, and he'd obtained it from a retired police officer, a guy named Dave Flanagan. The list itself isn't anything, complex or fancy. It's just names and addresses of over 300 individuals, mostly men. But the BBC went to great lengths to verify the identities on this list. They cross-referenced it with media archives, criminal records, even death registers.
It really wasn't just a list of names. The BBC really did their due diligence to make sure that it was accurate. So what did their investigation uncover about the people on this list?
The findings are really disturbing. Their research showed that roughly half of the people identified on that list had either been convicted of sexual offenses against children or had received cautions for those kinds of offenses. And these offenses ranged from possession and distribution of child abuse images to more serious charges like kidnap and rape. So it paints a very stark and alarming picture of the individuals that were involved with PIE.
Yeah, and this is really where the story takes kind of an even darker turn. The BBC found out that some of these individuals might still be working in professions that put them in contact with children.
Yes, and this is arguably the most unsettling revelation from this whole investigation.
Right.
The BBC identified almost 70 individuals from the list who had held positions that involved working with minors. These are teachers, social workers, sports coaches, youth workers, the kind of roles that demand a really high level of trust and responsibility.
Yeah.
And, the possibility that some of these people may still be in those kinds of positions, potentially putting children at risk, is just incredibly concerning.
So given, the BBC's commitment to responsible journalism, I'm sure they attempted to contact these individuals. What was the response?
Very few were willing to engage with the BBC at all. One individual claimed that his name was on the list, simply because of a loose association PIE had with a gay youth support group back in the 70s. Another admitted to being a member, but insisted that he only agreed with PIE's stance on what he considered unjust discrepancies in age of consent laws between homosexual and heterosexual relationships. And he vehemently denied any pedophilic inclinations. There was also a teacher at a private school located outside the UK who refused to speak with the BBC once PIE was even mentioned. Beyond these very limited responses, most just remained silent.
Wow. So what about law enforcement? Were they aware of PIE and their activities?
Yes, they were. In fact, retired officer Dave Flanagan, the one who provided the BBC with the list,
Yeah.
believes it was likely seized during a raid on PIE in the late 70s. At the time, he was part of the Metropolitan Police's Obscene Publications Unit, which was often nicknamed the Dirty Squad. And they were, actively investigating PIE.
But being a member of PIE wasn't actually illegal at the time, was it?
That's right, and that's what makes it so frustrating.
Yeah.
Flanagan explains that, while the police raided numerous individuals on the list, they couldn't use the list itself to actually get a search warrant. Membership in PIE just wasn't sufficient evidence to prove criminal activity. They needed more concrete proof of wrongdoing.
So how are they able to take action against PIE if just being a member wasn't illegal?
Well, they found a legal loophole, although a rather archaic one.
Hmm.
In the early 1980s, they focused on 3 high-ranking PIE members. They were linked to contact advertisements. They were in the group's magazine, and they prosecuted these individuals under a 17th century law called conspiracy to corrupt public morals.
Wow. A 17th century law. That's fascinating. Can you tell me more about that law and how it was applied to PIE members?
Sure. This law essentially criminalized acts that were deemed to be morally harmful to the public good. So in the case of PIE, the prosecution argued that the contact advertisements in their magazine promoted and facilitated sexual activity with children, which was considered, obviously, a very grave threat to public morality. 2 of these individuals received conditional discharges. But the third was actually sentenced to 2 years in prison. And this successful prosecution, while using, this old and somewhat obscure law, it effectively crippled PIE and led to their official disbandment in 1984.
So PIE ceased to exist as an organization, but the concerns about its members, particularly those in positions of authority, persisted, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us back to Peter McKelvey, the former social worker who gave the BBC the list. He'd been raising concerns about PIE members potentially working in social services and special schools. For years, he was observing connections between child abusers in the information that he gathered through his work, and he became increasingly frustrated by what he perceived as inaction from both the police and social services.
That's really disheartening to hear, that someone who was in a position to observe these patterns and raise the alarm was seemingly faced with so much resistance. Did anyone even listen to his concerns?
It seems, unfortunately not. His warnings went largely unheeded. In 1993, he even wrote a letter to the Department of Health, and in it, he explicitly stated, "The infiltration of the social work profession by pedophiles appears to be an extensive and serious problem," and he proposed the creation of a specialized team comprised of social workers and police to track down every single PIE member working in social care. However, according to McKelvey, his letter received absolutely no response.
It's just this lack of action, this potential disregard for such a serious issue is just deeply troubling. Did anything change in the years that followed?
Well, there have been some recent developments, although they come decades too late for many. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in the UK, which concluded in 2022, made several recommendations. One of the key recommendations was to introduce new sanctions, both professional and criminal, for individuals who fail to report child sexual abuse. And this directly addresses the very inaction that McKelvey had been highlighting for years.
That's a step in the right direction, for sure, but it is a belated one.
Yeah.
But this whole revelation about PIE and the potential for unchecked abuse within institutions that are supposed to protect children really raises some serious questions about systemic failures and the need for much greater vigilance. And we'll delve into these issues a little bit further in just a moment.
What really strikes me about all of this is that this issue, it goes way beyond just PIE. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, it found widespread failings across a bunch of different institutions in the UK. Schools, churches, even government bodies.
Yeah, it's really a chilling thought that protecting an organization's image could actually take precedence over protecting vulnerable children. It makes you wonder how many more cases like this might be out there.
That's exactly right. That's why I think exploring this, this dark chapter is so important. By shedding light on, the history of organizations like PIE and the systemic failures that allowed them to operate, hopefully we can raise awareness and encourage, greater vigilance in safeguarding children today.
You mentioned earlier that just being a member of PIE wasn't illegal at the time. Has that changed? Could someone be prosecuted today for having been a part of this group?
It's a really complex legal question. While PIE, no longer exists,
Yeah.
possession of materials that are associated with the group, particularly things that depict or promote child sexual abuse,
Mm.
and that can be considered illegal
Mm.
under current UK law, laws concerning child sexual abuse imagery, and the distribution of harmful materials have been significantly strengthened over the years.
So while past membership itself might not be directly prosecutable, holding on to or sharing those materials could have some serious legal consequences. It's a reminder that the internet, has a long memory
Hmm.
and actions can have repercussions, even decades later. We also talked about the police raid on PIE. Can you tell me a bit more about the Metropolitan Police's Obscene Publications Unit and their role in all this?
Sure, so the Obscene Publications Unit is often referred to as the Dirty Squad. It was a specialized branch of the Metropolitan Police,
Mm.
and they were dedicated to investigating obscenity and pornography. And their work often involved raiding establishments that were suspected of distributing illegal materials, including those related to child sexual abuse. And it was during one such raid, sometime in the late 1970s, that they likely ceased the PIE membership list.
It's kind of ironic that the unit tasked with combating obscenity actually ended up playing such a key role in uncovering one of the most disturbing instances of child sexual exploitation in UK history. It really highlights how the fight against abuse often takes these unexpected turns and requires a very multifaceted approach.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The Dirty Squad, despite their rather unsavory nickname, they played a really vital role in disrupting the activities of groups like PIE. Their work, often conducted kind of out of the public eye, was really crucial in protecting children from harm.
So what happened to the list after it was seized by the police?
Well, that's where the trail gets a bit
Yeah.
murky. We know the list was in police possession for roughly 20 years. Dave Flanagan, the retired officer, who eventually gave the list to the BBC, he recalls adding notes and updates to it. Throughout the 1980s,
It's fascinating to trace the journey of this document
Yeah.
from, a secret list hidden away in a police file to this bombshell revelation unearthed by investigative journalists. It speaks to the power of persistent inquiry and the importance of holding those in power accountable.
absolutely, and it really underscores that even seemingly insignificant pieces of information can have such a profound impact when they're, brought to light. In this case, this dusty old list
Yeah.
sparked a major investigation and, renewed focus on the urgent need to protect children from abuse.
Makes you wonder what other secrets might be hidden in archives and forgotten files, right? It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, and there's always more work to be done. Speaking of work to be done, this whole conversation has really highlighted a disturbing aspect of this, and that's the evolving understanding of child sexual abuse. Back in the 70s, when PIE was active, there was much less awareness of the psychological and emotional trauma that's inflicted on victims.
Yeah, you're right. Some people even argued, really misguidedly, that children could consent to sexual activity with adults. Thankfully, our understanding of child development and, the devastating long-lasting effects of abuse has advanced
It's
considerably.
hard to believe that those kinds of harmful ideas were ever even given a platform. It really serves as a stark reminder that societal norms can be incredibly dangerous when they fail to prioritize the well-being of children.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. It really compels us to confront the fact that progress isn't always linear. There are setbacks, there are periods of regression, and instances where harmful ideologies can actually gain traction. It really underscores the ongoing need to challenge outdated beliefs and to advocate for the rights and safety of the most vulnerable among us. This also raises questions, I think, about what we can learn from this period and how we can prevent
Yeah,
similar situations
Yeah.
from arising in the future.
absolutely. Examining this dark chapter of history, I think, offers valuable insights into how harmful ideologies can emerge and exploit these societal vulnerabilities. What key takeaways do you think are really crucial for us to consider as we, reflect on PIE and the broader issue of child sexual abuse?
I think there are a few. First, acknowledging the historical context in which, organizations like PIE emerged is really essential. Understanding the social and cultural climate of the time really helps us grasp how such harmful ideologies
Right.
could even gain a foothold, even temporarily.
There's that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think that really applies here. By studying these, dark chapters, we can hopefully learn from past mistakes and prevent similar situations from arising again. What else should we be taking away from this?
Second, I think we really have to recognize that systemic failures often enable child sexual abuse to persist. Institutions, whether they're schools, churches, social service organizations, need to prioritize the safety and well-being of children. Above all else, clear reporting mechanisms, thorough investigations, a zero-tolerance policy for, any form of abuse. These things are essential.
Right, and that includes holding individuals in positions of authority accountable, regardless of their status or reputation. The days of sweeping abuse under the rug or protecting abusers to save face, those days should be long gone. What other crucial points should we be taking away from all of this?
I think transparency and accountability
Yeah.
are just so vital in building trust and ensuring the safety of children. And finally, I think we must actively challenge harmful beliefs and attitudes that, perpetuate child sexual abuse. This includes promoting healthy sexuality education, fostering open communication about abuse, and creating a culture where children feel empowered to speak up and seek help. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. It's about creating a society where children feel safe and supported and empowered to voice their concerns without fear of judgment or reprisal. We need to, dismantle the power structures and societal norms that allow abuse to flourish. But this conversation has been incredibly heavy, and I think it's important to kind of shift gears a little bit and focus on solutions. What can we as individuals do to make a difference in the fight against child sexual abuse?
I think there are many ways to contribute. First and foremost, educate yourself about the issue. Understand the signs of abuse. Learn about the resources that are available to victims. Familiarize yourself with the laws and policies that, surround child protection. What do you think about that?
I think knowledge is definitely power in this situation. The more we know about this issue, the better equipped we are to identify it and address it. What other actions can we take? Yeah, for sure. Being informed, like you said, empowers us to, recognize those potential signs of abuse and then take the appropriate action. What other steps can we take to make a difference?
Well, I think being an advocate for children is really crucial. Speak up against those harmful attitudes and behaviors. Challenge people who make light of abuse and support organizations that are working to protect children's rights. Even seemingly small actions can have a really big impact.
Yeah, I imagine things like volunteering at a local youth organization, mentoring a child, or even just being a supportive presence in a young person's life can go a long way in creating that safe and nurturing environment.
Exactly. Every effort, big or small, really does contribute to building a culture of support and protection for children. And finally, I think, if you ever suspect that a child is being abused, please report it. Don't hesitate. Don't make excuses. Contact the authorities, a child protection agency, or a trusted adult. Your actions could potentially save a child from further harm. It's a responsibility we all share.
You're absolutely right. Reporting any suspicion of abuse is paramount. It's about putting a child's safety, above all else. This deep dive has been incredibly informative, I think, but also really emotionally heavy. We uncovered this really dark chapter in history. We've confronted some uncomfortable truths and really grappled with the ongoing challenge of protecting children from abuse. But I think amidst all this darkness, there's also hope. Do you think so?
I do. There's hope that by raising awareness, challenging these harmful norms, and really empowering individuals to act, we can create a world where every child is safe, respected, and cherished. That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To build a society that truly values and protects its most vulnerable members. It's a goal worth striving for, no matter how difficult the journey might be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has given us all a lot to reflect on as we move forward. It's crucial to remember the lessons that we've learned and the responsibility we all share in safeguarding children's well-being. Silence is never the answer. We have to speak up, take action, and be a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves.
I think that's well said.
Yeah.
It's about fostering that culture of vigilance, empathy, and action to make sure that every child has that opportunity to grow and thrive in a safe and supportive environment.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this really complex and challenging topic. Your insights have been invaluable.
And my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the fight against child sexual abuse is ongoing, and each one of us has a role to play. So let's continue to learn, to advocate, and to act, and create a world where every child is protected and empowered.